Hello, everyone. My name is Lexi. Welcome back to Sincerely Self podcast. Today, we're joined by Barbara Boselli. She is a leadership trainer, speaker, and then she's also the founder of bNow Consulting. So, Barbara, tell us a little bit about you and kind of what got you into this self-development space.
Hi, thank you. So nice to be here. So I was born and raised in Brazil actually, and I came to the US in 2006 to get my MBA from the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern. And up until that point, I had worked in large corporations in Brazil. Then I came here, got my MBA, went on to work for Google. And I've always really worked on my own self-development, and I've also liked this field. And as I was climbing the corporate ladder, I started noticing that some leaders were different than others. They were able to influence people without sometimes even the formal authority. Some leaders communicated very smoothly and clearly. Some leaders, they were able to stay focused and curious and open in the middle of chaos. So I was really like impressed by that. But I had this understanding that either you were born with those skills, you were like a natural born leader, or you weren't. And I
Mhm.
didn't know until I started researching and taking a training on this field that actually we all can develop leadership skills. We all can develop emotional intelligence skills. It just takes practice and training. And eventually I decided to leave my job at Google and take a sabbatical to rethink my career, invest in my own development, and also stay with my kids. And that's when I went back to school, started really going deep in human development. Eventually, I got certified to teach a class called Search Inside Yourself, which is a leadership training founded in emotional intelligence and mindfulness that was first developed at Google, and then it became like a world-class training offered in many companies. So I got certified to teach that. Then I started developing my own trainings. Then I expanded to coaching, and that's what led me to where I am today, leading this company, bNow Consulting.
That's amazing. I feel like the best kind of circumstances come totally unexpected. So I love that you had kind of such an intense career shift.
Yes, exactly. And I'll just say to your listeners, it wasn't easy because I had invested so much time, so much money, so much energy in building that career. And when I decided to leave the corporate world, it was even like an identity crisis for me because I've always been Barbara from Google, Barbara from L'Oreal, Barbara from whatever. And then suddenly I was just Barbara and maybe Barbara mom. So it wasn't easy, but it was like years coming for me. Like I already knew, for a while that I wanted to do something different. And I finally, pulled the plug, and I don't regret for a minute. It was, and my experience, for a moment I had an idea that this was going to be like a waste, right? That I was going to start all over. And that's just not true because the experience that I had throughout my life is paramount for me to be the professional that I am today, in the role that I have today.
Yeah. So on Be Now, you talk a lot about mindset shifts and specifically the certain mindset shifts kind of you had to take to start moving into this new career. So what would you say were some of those mindset shifts that you kind of went through?
When I switched careers, I was in my late 30s, like early 40s, and I definitely thought, I'm too old to start over again. And I invested way too much. How am I going to do that? Or this is not for me, right? My path is a corporate path. Those were some of the mindsets that really kept me from, moving forward sooner.
Hmm.
And and then I started just taking one step at a time. For me, I think when people ask me like, what was the key learning that you had from this career shift? And for me was that it's one step at a time. Step two is the enemy of step one. For some time, I thought that I had to have my whole career path lined out. I had to know exactly what I was going to end up, as if we ever end up somewhere.
Mhm.
And that really paralyzed me because I had no idea. I've never been an entrepreneur before, so I didn't know, how am I going to get clients, how I'm going to build my website, how I'm going to even, create the name for my company, what am I going to offer? And I wanted to have all that figured out before I took the first step. So that held me back. When I decided to take one step and then the next step and then the next step, things just started flowing, and I was able to kind of adjust throughout the path.
Yeah. It kind of seems like once you start following kind of your intuition and the things that you feel drawn to, at first it is very scary, change is very scary, but it seems to kind of flow. Like you were saying, it just kind of all seemed to fall into place.
100%. Yeah, I'm a big believer that when we put time and energy in things, they just kind of happen, right? And
Mhm.
there might be bumps in the road for sure, there might be setbacks. And if you just keep consistently moving towards your goals, you're going to work it out.
Yeah. It's kind of our belief systems that hold us back from pursuing those type of things. So, what would you say through your time consulting, what are some of the most common kind of belief systems you see that are holding people back?
That is very true. I would agree with you that our beliefs are really what gets in the way of a lot of our successes and accomplishments. I hear a lot of people, a very common belief is, I'm not enough.
Mhm.
I'm just not valuable. And then with that comes so many consequences. People don't believe in themselves, so they don't even try to do things, right? Or
Mhm.
people take things personally because they don't feel like they are worth it. And someone makes a comment that sometimes they're trying to help, and you listen to it as a criticism, or people judging you because you don't see your own self-worth.
Mhm.
So when we can start like creating that awareness. And one area that I really focus on is this idea that each of us, we have our ways to interpret reality. That's based on our own biases, our own stories, our own narratives. It's like we each have like a way that we perceive things.
Mhm.
And often we are not even aware of that, because from a very young age we start making rules in our mind about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's possible, what's not possible. And then those rules, they kind of frame how we see every situation.
Mhm.
So I'll give you an example. Growing up, I grew up in a family that was very loving, and where my father, he wasn't super open to um, debate. If he had
Mhm.
a strong opinion about something, he wasn't very welcoming to contradiction. He felt like he knew what was right, and then if I tried to debate with him, he wasn't happy. So I learned really early that disagreement equals disrespect.
Mhm.
And for the longest time, that was a reality about the world. That was a truth about the world for me. Just like the sun rises every morning, you don't disagree with people. That's not nice. That's not okay. And eventually, of course, I understood that wasn't the reality about the world. Actually, in other houses, if you didn't speak up, that was seen as disrespectful, because that might indicate that you don't care, that you're not engaged in the conversation.
Mhm.
So when I understood that, then I started having a choice, right? In each moment, I could have a choice. Do I want to speak up here or not? Will it serve me or not? Not because it's disrespectful, but is this going to get me closer to where I want to go? So a lot of us, I mean, all of us walk around with a lot of this truth that we make about the world, about people, and we don't even realize.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we all are kind of stuck in these conditionings almost from the truths that we tell ourselves, either growing up from our experiences or just in all the relationships we have in our life. We see this certain reality, but it's just from like the stories we're telling ourselves, like you said.
100%. Totally agree. And
Yeah.
when we start understanding that, then a whole new world opens up, because everything we thought wasn't possible now might be possible. If we had problems with people, with circumstances, we start seeing them from a different lenses, and then we can engage in a different way. We can relate to people, relate to situations in a whole different way of our choosing, right? We're not doing
Yeah.
it in an autopilot mode anymore. We are being aware, and we get to choose how we want to respond.
Yeah, thinking becomes conscious instead of just so subconscious is when you kind of start taking control of your life.
Totally. I agree.
I know you have mentioned on your website that you love kind of neuroscience and how it plays a role into kind of changing your mindset and changing your reality. So I also love the way that neuroscience plays a role. So how have you kind of incorporated that into your consulting?
Yeah, so um, I like to talk about that because some people need the science in order to buy into an idea, right? Because for the longest time, scientists believe that at some point our brain was formed, and from then on it was just downhill, right? Our gray
Mhm.
mass would just shrink based on our habits, but it was kind of like a set thing. And as you know from neuroscience, we now understand that our brain is malleable throughout our lives, and we create strong connections in our neurons based on how we behave, our thinking, and then they become kind of our default mode. So I like to make this analogy with imagining there's a mountain with fresh snow. That's kind of how our brain is when we're born. It's just a blank slate. And
Mhm.
then if the kids start sledding down the mountain, at first there's going to be all these different paths. And then some paths are just going to get stronger because the kids are going there more often. And then eventually all the kids are going to go in that path, because it's just like the natural path that the kids are going to sled down. And with our brain, as you know, the same thing happens, right? The more we create habits on how we think, how we behave, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves. Those habits become our default way. So when I explain this to people, they understand that it's not in their DNA, because a lot of us feel like the way we think is kind of in our DNA. It's who we are. And
Mhm.
I mean, there is a part of us, of course, that's nature, but a lot of us is nurture, is our habits. And when we understand that, then we can start making a conscious decision, if we want, to create new path in that. If we know that this path here is not working well for us, we can start developing a new path just by practicing a new way of thinking, acting, right, or relating with people.
That's so true. I think kind of something that a lot of people get stuck in with, because it's so much easier said than done, being like, okay, I'm going to be more aware of my thoughts because I know the way that it's going to affect my life. People get stuck in the negative thought spirals. So, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of stuck in those negative thought spirals and they're not sure how to get out of those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, the first step is creating awareness, right? So a lot of us, we are you know in that loop, and we don't even realize. So
Hmm.
if we start like naming what's happening, observing what's happening, we start creating awareness that this is the kind of thought that's going on in my mind, and this is what those thoughts are leading to. Because the way that this cycle works is, we have something happens, right? And then we have a thought about it. So let's say someone cuts in front of you on traffic. We have a thought about it. Oh, this guy is whatever, right? Uh, and and then we have that thought, and then an emotion develops. So we get really angry because someone cut us in front of traffic, and
Hmm.
then this emotion leads to a behavior. Now we are acting from the emotion, so we might yell at the person, we might start cursing, whatever it is. And then that behavior will lead to the outcome. And the outcome in this case could be, I'm gonna if my kid is sitting in the car with me and they just heard me cursing, now, my outcome is that I didn't show up like I wanted in front of my child, for example. So our thoughts lead to the emotions lead to the behavior, and the behavior leads to the outcome. So the first thing is really to understand the thoughts and get awareness about them. And the
Mhm.
way to do that, I think that was more of your question, is moving from autopilot to aware. Meditation is a great way to do that because help us really focus inside and start being more aware of what's happening, because usually we don't even know that all those thoughts and emotions are going on. We just go on automatic, like moving through our life. So meditation is a great way to do that. Also, for me personally, and I know a lot of my clients really benefit from being in nature, right? Getting out of your space. Like we spend so much time in front of a screen, the computer, the telephone, the iPad, and just kind of getting out of it and being in nature. I think when we get out of our houses and we get out in the world, we also get out of our heads a little bit, right? So just creating this little bit of separation between ourselves and our thoughts. There's a
Mhm.
metaphor that I really like, which is that thoughts, they are like clouds moving in the sky. We are not our thoughts. Our thoughts just happen involuntarily, and we choose to kind of um, grab thoughts and make them true and make them important. And when we
Mhm.
start having awareness of that, we can just notice the thought and let it go so it doesn't affect us as much. And again, meditation is something that can really help with that, because help us be more focused, more aware, and then improves this ability to kind of notice our thoughts and realize in the moment that I'm not this thought. I don't need to respond to this thought. This thought, I can just let it go and then find another one that's going to feel more empowering for me.
Yeah, because I think so many times people assume that whatever thought they have is a representation of who they are, when that could be farther from the truth, you know? Our thoughts don't actually represent who we are. And I think sometimes the root of the negative thoughts kind of can come from a lack of confidence or struggling with that self-love. So, what advice would you give for kind of strengthening the love for yourself and kind of some of the things you can do to improve that?
Um, there are so many things. One one practice that I love is self-compassion.
Hmm.
And this is something that I bring to organizations with executives. And although it might sound a little woo-woo at first, and really radical for people to think about self-compassion, there's a lot of research that backs up the fact that self-compassion is a great tool for emotional resilience. And self-compassion is a because we are used to be our worst enemies, to be really, really harsh on ourselves. We learn from a very young age that the way to get better is by being strict and harsh. And we treat ourselves a lot harsher than we treat our friends. So
Oh, yeah.
self-compassion is about there's three components to self-compassion according to Kristen Neff, who is the main researcher in this field. And the first step of self-compassion is mindfulness. And is mindfulness in the sense that you look at a situation for what it is, not based on your interpretation of it, or without all your judgments. You're just kind of being aware of what's happening. So let's say you go to a job interview and you do terribly, right? um, our reaction usually is, I'm horrible, I'm never going to be able to pass an interview, how could I do that? So the first step of self-compassion is look at the interview. What happened here, right? What led me to not do well in this interview? Maybe I didn't prepare enough. Maybe I didn't sleep well last night. Maybe the interviewer is just like really tough. Maybe I'm not even interested in this job. That's why I wasn't, really compelled to do my best. So you kind of look at the situation. The second step is common humanity. Common humanity is about noticing that you are not the first or the last person that is going to fail, that's going to have a setback, that's going to fail in an interview. And when we're able to notice that, we don't feel so alone, like there's something wrong with me. It's just part of the human experience that we all have setbacks and failures.
Yeah.
And then the third step of self compassion is around kindness, self kindness. Again, talk to yourself like you would talk to a best friend. And
Mhm.
if you're able to go through these three steps, you will have a more real understanding of what happened. And the reason why self-compassion is a great way to propel us forward and to create emotional resilience is because now you're in a place where you are much faster to move on, to learn from what happened, take those learnings and do better next time.
Yeah, I love that you use the kind of the example of treating yourself like somebody you love, because I've actually talked about that on this podcast before, because it's so important. If our friend or family member was in the situation we were in, we would not talk to them the way we're talking to ourselves. We would not give them that advice. We would treat them with so much more compassion. So I love that you kind of use that as an analogy for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's helpful to kind of put in perspective, right? And most of us don't even notice how harsh we're being on ourselves. We're just so used to that. Again, it's one of those ways of thinking and behaving that is very ingrained in many of us. And even with the awareness, sometimes it's hard to get out of it. So it does take practice.
Oh, yeah. What would you say would be kind of the first step in moving towards becoming more self-aware?
Um, it's taking pauses. I think taking pauses to kind of reflect and notice what happened. We live in this world that is so fast. Things are happening all the time. There's so much stimuli from the environment. And most of us don't take the time to pause and do self reflection. And this is so important. A great way to create that pause and to self reflect is through journaling, right? Some people like to journal in the morning and they do some like writing around what did I learn yesterday? What do I hope for today? What's one thing I'm grateful for? And just kind of by creating those moments of reflection, you really start developing more self awareness and more understanding about how you operate so that you can start choosing if you want to do something different, if you want to transform anything.
Yeah. And I feel like in during that practice of kind of journaling and opening up, you're going to see like the good parts of yourself, and you're also going to see the parts that you may be struggling with and that are not so easy to accept.
Because every part of us has a shadow, right? So if you are
Mhm.
someone that is, let's say, some people struggle with being too impulsive, right? People that feel like they can't hold their tongue before they know they said something, and they feel like that's their biggest challenge or negative aspect. These
Mhm.
people are probably the people that are very authentic, that are very, you know who they are, and they connect well with people. So I it's not to sugarcoat or pretend that there are not areas where we can develop. And I like to invite people to look at their negative areas as, this is a part of me and I can leverage it in some way. And it's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just a question of choosing, right? What to bring out when. um and having said that, we all are gonna make mistakes. We're all gonna say things that we're gonna regret later. We're all gonna fail. All gonna miss deadlines. And again, moving into that self acceptance and understanding that we are all human beings, that failure is not only a part of life, but it's an extremely important part of life, right? I think this is a big one because we are trained to believe that we shouldn't fail, like we that failing is wrong. Again, that's one of those beliefs that from a very young age we learn that. And the truth is that failure is what propels us forward. Like I have small kids, and when they come to me with something around failure that they're not feeling well, I tell them, you fell so many times before you were able to walk in your 2 feet. Today, you think this is really easy, but there was a time that that was not easy for you, and you fell on your butt a million times. And then eventually you did it, right? And that's what
Mhm.
failure does to us. We learn that we need to balance a different way, to do something a different way, so that next time we can do better and better and better. So that's what I invite people to think about when they're being really harsh on on themselves, and when they're looking at their characteristics in a negative way. Um, there's a different way to look at them. I think this is where the shift can happen, because
Mhm.
it's not about not being who you are, but really about accepting or shaping a little bit so that you can bring the best out of you out. Because we are all special in our own ways. We all can shine in our own ways, and it's a lot about us getting out of our way, right, to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's such a good lens to look at it through because in society it's pushed. There's a belief that you cannot fail, that it's bad if you fail, when really failure is just a proof that you're trying and proof that you're learning, right? So I love that you are pushing it
100%.
to be that lens and instead of a negative trait, it's just a trait that makes you who you are and one that you can kind of improve on.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I agree 100%.
yeah. So the last question I have for you, Barbara, is a little bit about you had mentioned earlier in the episode you had these beliefs from your childhood with your dad that were kind of instilled in you and you had to kind of become aware and overcome. So for those people who are struggling with these beliefs they've had from childhood, what advice would you give them to start overcoming those?
Well, first you need to identify them, right? And I I think sometimes working with a coach, for example, can be very helpful because we can see what we can see. We all have blind spots. So
Hmm.
having someone to help point out those blind spots so that you create that awareness can be very, very helpful. And in addition to that, again, I'm just going to go back to what I said before, is the self-reflection, is taking the moment to understand, if you're feeling uneasy, you're feeling upset, what is creating this? What thoughts are happening in my mind right now that are leading to this kind of feelings in my body that are leaving that are leading to me showing up in a certain way? Because it all starts in our thoughts, and a thought can be another thought, as you expressed really well. We are not our thoughts. We don't need to hold on and believe in our thoughts. So it's really about creating that awareness, either through working with someone like a coach or a therapist, uh, doing a practice of self-reflection, journaling, mindfulness, so doing some meditation, spending time with yourself. All of that can help us get to know ourselves a little better and start moving through those limiting beliefs, those stories, those narratives that are getting in the way.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned a step for overcoming this is like going to therapy or getting a coach or something, someone who can assist you on this journey because I think a lot of people sometimes feel like almost ashamed. They're like, "Oh, I should figure this out on my own. I shouldn't have to go get help," when really it's such an amazing tool and I think it gets overlooked sometimes.
100%. And the coaching profession, the coach is here to help you achieve your potential. It's like if you think about a sports coach, right? The person that hires a tennis coach, for example, it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's just because, just as any human being, they have their limitations and their strengths, and they want someone to push them, to
Mhm.
help them be the best they can be. And I look at executive coaching, professional coaching exactly the same way. You don't need to feel there's something wrong with you to hire a coach. Quite the opposite. You are someone that is aiming higher, that wants to be the best version of yourself, that wants to really develop into your full potential. So working with someone is just going to get you there faster.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, it's like an amazing tool. I think in self-development, there's so many amazing tools that you can find along the way to help you get there faster. And if you're accepting of those, it'll just amplify your success.
100%.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Barbara, and for all of your insight. I will
Of course.
have bNow Consulting in our show notes. Make sure you guys go and check it out. You could get this advice for your own life if you schedule to meet with Barbara, which would be so amazing. And Barbara, do you have any last messages for our audience here?
Well, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or follow-ups from this episode, feel free to reach out to me. You can do that through my website. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. And I will see you guys next week.